Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the penultimate episode of Rival Recon for this historic season that the Reds are currently having. Having secured the FA Cup on Saturday, there's only 2 more Premier League games remaining, and thanks to some Jared Bowen-inspired heroics at the London Stadium earlier, the Reds should be able to take their chase for the title right until the final day, where perhaps a few former Reds might be able to lend a hand. But on this week's show, however, we'll be focusing on that next Premier League hurdle as Liverpool head to Southampton on Tuesday evening. So joining me on the pod this week to discuss Tuesday's game against Southampton, I welcome back freelance football writer for Football Fancast, Dan Hargraves. Welcome back, Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, good to speak with you as always. And I was just looking back to sort of the last time it was that we caught up ahead of the sort of Liverpool-Southampton game early in the season. That was November, sort of right at the end of last November. And you spoke a lot around sort of the growing frustration with some of the inconsistencies you were seeing from the Southampton side, despite a few sort of bright sparks here and there, and some players who are really having, I think it's fair to say, pretty strong individual seasons as well. As we come to sort of the game on Tuesday now, sort of being right at the end of the season, I just wanted to get your sort of overarching thoughts on how the season's gone, how things seem to have sort of unwinded over the last 11 games, I suppose. Just your general thoughts on how the season appears to have been managed.
I think there are a lot of frustrations. I think mainly given how poor we finished the season. I think when you look at where we were kind of early March, approaching the top 10 into an FA Cup quarter final, we've been in some tremendous form. We'd gone to Spurs and won, got a point at Man United, some impressive home results as well. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head how many games in a row we went unbeaten at home, but it was a really good run, our best for a good few years. And then it completely crashed and burned, kind of like how it did last season, really. So from kind of being in contention for a top half spot, we've kind of gone down to nervously looking over our shoulders with the last few games remaining, I think.
Yeah, I was just looking. It seems to be around sort of the Aston Villa game, doesn't it? On sort of at the start of March, where things really started to unfold. Before we sort of dive into that individual patch and talk about sort of how the sort of the reasons behind that, in terms of the inconsistencies that you'd seen this season, or actually that period of improvement where you mentioned the home form was looking strong, what was clicking at that point that sort of has now vanished?
I think we had the same team pretty much starting every game. We had individuals in form. The likes of Armando Broja was hitting the back of the net regularly. Shea Adams was playing really well. We just had Stuart Armstrong return from injury, and although he's had a pretty poor season overall, his record in terms of the games that Southampton win with and without him is absolutely nuts. So he's very influential too. You had Mohamed Salisu at the back playing excellently. We had 3 fullbacks in Tino Livramento, Carl Walker-Peters, Roman Perro all playing well when they got the chance. So everyone knew their role. Everyone was playing in the same system. And I think games came quite quickly. And because we were in such good form, Southampton just picked up that habit of getting results and winning, especially at home. And then in terms of how it's kind of been undone, I think we had one shock in the Aston Villa game in the sense that they went all guns blazing, scored an early goal, and we just capitulated. And the supporters were promised a response, and we're kind of sitting here 2.5 months later, and it's gone from a 4-0 defeat to Aston Villa to, I think, one win. I couldn't even tell you 12, 13 games.
Yeah. It's the last 11 games. There was one win in there, which
11
was that
games.
surprising actually sort of 1-0 win over Arsenal, which is obviously very amusing. But
Mm.
sort of the fact that was the game that it took. Yeah, and we've spoken in the past about these periods. It feels like under Hasenhüttl, but not necessarily sort of related to Hasenhüttl, but sort of Southampton managers over the years where there appears to be a patch of good form, the team's playing well, and either it's an over reliance on a small squad, which I think you seem to be suggesting there that it's often been the same players rolled out week in week out to try and do the job, or it's actually just a lack of quality in certain places as well. I was reading an article sort of earlier today about sort of a 5 or 6 point plan to fix Southampton, and it was just interesting some of the points that they highlighted. And I just wanted to start with sort of the first one around the manager. We'd spoken in the past about sort of your belief around how Hasenhüttl clearly a talented coach, but there have been these sort of wild periods where there's been some heavy defeats or sort of long series without sort of necessarily playing the best football or picking up the most points. And you mentioned fans were in an interesting place, I suppose, with Hasenhüttl and sort of their relationship with him at that stage of the season, earlier on in the season. Where do you think they are right now?
Very split. Very split. I mean, last weekend's defeat to Brentford was the first time there's been public kind of chants from fans
Wow.
expressing desire for him to be sacked, which is a pretty big it's a pretty big leap from where some fans were just a couple months ago. I think this run of form has really turned the tide. I feel like there's this. I mean, I said it before last summer, because we'd finished so poorly, but this summer really does feel like it's make or break for the Saints, in the sense that it's the first summer window with new ownership, which has brought a lot of optimism. It has to be said, not the sort of optimism you're having at Newcastle. These aren't owners with bottomless pockets, of course they're not, but at the same time, it kind of feels like restrictions that we had under our previous ownership won't be as common now. So it's a case of, do fans trust Hasenhüttl to go and lead that kind of hopefully exciting transfer window, or do we go for someone new completely to kind of lead that, I guess, revolution? But from my perspective, I'm still of the mindset that he at least deserves to oversee this transfer window. I feel like, having been given limited resources for the best part of coming up 4 years in December, I think he deserves it. We've been waiting for the new ownership to come through, and he deserves the chance to kind of lead it. I mean, reliable reports are suggesting that we're going to be a very busy club in the window, but we're going to have to be, because the amount of teams that are going to have, investment, that are going to build, Southampton will get left behind if they don't invest this summer.
Yeah, I mean, just to hammer home that point that you mentioned there on Hasenhüttl and sort of the budget that he's worked on, I've got it here actually. Yes, Southampton's net spend has been 22 million over the last 5 seasons. So just in comparison, Watford, for example, who are going down pretty comfortably, 125 million, but Burnley 60 million, Brighton somehow 214 million, and even Sheffield United, who saw yesterday, have a higher net spend than Southampton over the last 5 seasons, about 56 million. So that really does sort of tell the story, as you were mentioning there, just how little investment there's been and how much of a reliance there's been on him getting the best out of a group of players that at times has shown that actually perhaps they aren't of the right sort of quality. He's had to pick them up off of the floor after some heavy games, heavy defeats, and try and get those players to perform, which I suppose is sort of the challenge you were talking about there. Sport Republic, as those new owners, as you mentioned, it does sound like it's going to be a busy summer window, and that sort of factors into some other points as well around. Do you think there is a need to shake up some of the coaching staff around Hasenhüttl, or I know there's going to be a change in terms of the actual the infrastructure above him in terms of the scouts, and I believe the head of scouting from Southampton is actually going to be moving over to Leicester, if I read that right. So it seems like there's the opportunity there to shake things up.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of fans have been calling for a change in coaching staff for a long time. You look at the personnel on his bench, and I mean the experience is pretty lackluster. If I'm honest with you, I mean he came in with Daniel Roll, who then went on to have a role at
Yeah.
Bayern Munich. He's very fondly thought of by Hansi Flick, and I think he's gone with Hansi Flick to the German national team. So that kind of tells you a lot about how good he was. And then I don't think they made a replacement for a good while. And then I couldn't even tell you his surname or pronounce it. That's how kind of irrelevant he is in terms of influence amongst the fan base. But Richard, I think Kildsbilker, something like that. I've probably absolutely butchered that, but he's down as the assistant manager, whereas you've also got Kelvin Davis, obviously a Southampton legend for his playing days. But there's kind of a thought that, is he only there on merit as opposed to his coaching credentials? Again, Dave Watson was promoted from goalkeeping coach to higher up in the coaching staff. And it just kind of feels like, a real rejig is needed. It doesn't feel like it's just on Hazen at all. But having said that, the same mistakes are still happening, those heavy defeats. I mean, that defeat at Brentford last weekend was, for me, the worst result of the season. We lost 6-0 at home to Chelsea, but I think losing 3-0 away at Brentford, obviously they've had a brilliant first season in the top flight, but the fact that they were just so far above us in terms of every aspect of the pitch, having been in the Premier League for just one season, was nothing short of laughable, really, given the fact that we beat them by 3 goals at our place back in January. So that kind of emphasises how quickly it's gone from pretty excellent to pretty catastrophic for Saints. I mean, looking at the Premier League table now, the fact that Leeds are absolutely hopeless has kind of saved us from a potential late drop-in to that relegation dogfight. Technically speaking, we're not mathematically safe. I mean, it would require a massive goal swing for at the moment it's looking like Leeds to lure us into that bottom 3. But the fact that, mentally it seems as though the players have gone on the beach with safety not confirmed mathematically, it's laughable. What looked like was going to be a really good season has just completely crashed and burned once again. It's the same mistakes. And the thing that's been frustrating for me, it hasn't really been spoken about in the fan base, but given where we were in March, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, as they say, but given how poor some of, the likes of Wolves, Leicester, at times in the league, West Ham have been of late, so if Southampton had kind of continued some decent form, not obviously what they were doing, that wasn't sustainable, but if they'd kind of picked up a few more wins here and there, I honestly think we could have been knocking on the door of that 7th spot. I mean, you look at what Brighton have done; they've been excellent, and that's exactly what Southampton should have done, really. And I'm looking at the table, and they won't finish in that top 7, but they're gonna finish awfully close and have a really good season, and that's exactly what Southampton should have done. They were above Brighton. We went to their place and drew quite recently. It's been a real frustration as to how we're letting ourselves down in the same areas once again. And that's where there's frustration with Hasenhüttl, because it kind of feels like he's the easy one to blame. We've blamed the players plenty of times. He's the one kind of not rectifying these mistakes.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfectly reasonable to be sort of upset with the way in which things have unfolded. And as you mentioned there, I think when teams see that there are teams that are considerably worse than them, you do sort of wonder how that affects players' psychology and sort of the real levels of motivation that they know ultimately that it would take something pretty dramatic for them to be pulled down into it. But that's obviously not the right mentality that you want to have at the club. And you mentioned allowing Hasenhüttl the opportunity to stay, oversee that transfer window, perhaps have even more of an influential role actually in terms of sort of how players are brought in. And I suppose it's also an interesting question around, I'm sure the new owners are contemplating. Obviously, in the past, Southampton were a team that signed young, I'd say like relatively unproven players, but had good reputations, and then built them, and then looked to sell them for even higher sort of sums of money, and then reinvested that money pretty well when things are working sort of the most seamlessly at the club. Do you think that's still the same model that they will look to want to go back to, or do you think there is a case that maybe For every Livramento, for every sort of young star that you uncover, actually there needs to be a couple of older heads in that squad as well who can I don't know if this is too much of a cliche, prevent those sort of games where there are heavy defeats or perhaps the team appears to lose their head.
Yeah, I don't think that sort of model is going to be as kind of in the forefront as it used to be, of course, when loads of players, of course, were going to Liverpool. But um, I think this last summer they kind of experimented the ball. They experimented with getting these young players in, and for the most part, I think it's worked. I think it's just now where the season's crashed and burned. That's where the lack of experience has kind of come into tuition. Really, it's become incredibly obvious. Um, that kind of naivety that that some of these young players are going to have, which is obviously expected, and that's where I think Southampton just need to find the balance of bringing in some experienced heads who obviously have potential still. I'm not talking kind of 30 plus. I'm kind of thinking the last stages of their 20s, just to help some of these players through. You look at Tino Livramento has been an absolute star, given how little Southampton paid for him and the fact that he's just 19 years old. I'm absolutely devastated that his first breakthrough season, or his breakthrough season, ended with an ACL. That's heartbreaking for him. Mohamed Salah, I think he's been incredibly impressive up until this poor run of form, but people forget on the outside that I think he's only just 22. He's got plenty of football still to play. Kyle Walker-Peters is I think he's just turned 25, 24. So he's got his best years ahead of him still. So, there's a lot of young players in this Southampton team, and the kind of most experienced head really comes, I would say, in James Ward-Prowse at 27, 28, and that kind of tells you everything you need to know. I think we're one of the youngest squads in the league, which obviously is going to be very excited if we can keep hold of these players for a couple more years. But at the same time, with other teams building around us, we can't rely on that because, Southampton could easily get sucked in, and, all this, finding young players for cheap prices and having them available to kind of make us a really solid Premier League outfit. Well, that's no good if Southampton end up dropping to the Championship.
No, of course, yeah. I think and it's much easier said than done to actually roll that model out, of course. But you mentioned some of those players there who, I mean, obviously devastating for Livramento to end his season that way. But I think you spoke about Brozier earlier on. You mentioned James Ward-Prowse there, who I think is important to come on to, given sort of the individual season some of these players have had. But if you were to highlight those players, Salisu as well, who you think have had strong seasons despite this sort of recent run of poor form from the team, sort of players that you can look to sort of build around in the future. Who would those be that you wanted to sort of highlight? And has there been anybody that you think actually maybe has gone a little bit under the radar?
We'll go with that second question first. I think Kyle Walker-Peters, he was my player of the season. He got my vote. It was won by James Ward-Prowse, but he got my vote. I think the amount he's cut. I mean, to be honest with you, I can't think of many bad games in the two and a half seasons that Kyle Walker-Peters has been at Southampton. I can't think of many bad games where it's really stood out that he kind of struggled. For me, he hasn't put a foot wrong all season. I think the England call-up was incredibly justified, and I'm really glad that Gareth Southgate recognised how good he's been, along with some other players like Tyrick Mitchell, for example. I'm glad he got a call-up because I think he's been fantastic. But for me, Walker-Peters has been incredibly underrated. I think he's currently better than any right back at Spurs right now, and that tells you a lot, given that they kind of let him go for a limited fee. And what's been most impressive about Kyle is the fact that he had this 18-year-old right back come in, no senior football, and pip him to a starting place in the Premier League on the opening day. And, Southampton had already spent decent money to replace Ryan Bertrand with Roman Perro coming in. But instead of, sulking, he worked hard and he developed his game as a left back. And for the majority of the season, he's played at left back. That's why he got into the England squad. He's kind of beat Roman Perro to the left back spot, with Tino obviously being so good. Of course, now for the next handful of months, Walker-Peters will be back at right back. But, the fact that he's kind of developed his game that way has been really impressive. of course, we'll talk about Ward-Prowse. I mean, the season he's had, he's been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you can kind of see, given how much he's contributed, why he was in the final 8 for Premier League Player of the Year. I know a lot of supporters, I think particularly top 6 fans, would have thought that various players would have been more suitable for a nomination. But for me, Prowse has been just, his game's completely developed. He had a slow start to the season. I think he, of all people, would admit that. I think up until kind of October, he was pretty bang average, to be honest, given the fact that he just missed out on a Euro spot for England. He wasn't really showing many signs of kind of developing his game, but he got sent off at Chelsea, had a 3-game suspension, came back, having played hundreds of games consecutively for Saints. He came back, and from then on has been an absolute rock in the midfield, winning everything. Of course, you've got the free kicks where he scored. He scored a couple of goals outside of the box as well, or different types of goals. I mean, I couldn't tell you his free kick accuracy this season, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was over 50%. I mean, every time he steps up, it looks as though he's going to score it. It's phenomenal. But as a box-to-box midfielder, I think he's an excellent choice for England. I'm not just being biased. His set pieces, his physicality in the middle of the park. He's become a bit more of a brute, learned the dark arts. I feel like we've spoken about that before. That was something Hasenhuttl developed with Ward-Prowse.
Yeah.
And then with Mohamed Salisu, it's a shame the way he's finished his season, because he's been absolutely dreadful of late after what was such a really, really promising first kind of I'll divide his season into fifths. I think he had the first 3 fifths were excellent, and the final 2 have been poor. So it's kind of become a perfect timing, really, because he was definitely going to be sniffed around, or targeted, I should say, with big clubs sniffing around for him. I know Barcelona are interested, blah blah blah. But I think he'd stay on for at least another year. But I think out of the 3 players I just mentioned, Salisu's going to be the one that within the next probably 2 years, I'd say, will go for big money. I think that's how it's going to work out. I think Ward-Prowse, you've got the loyalty factor. Walker-Peters, he knows what it's been like to play for a big club and be snubbed. Whereas Salisu, without a doubt, would have been bought knowing that, or the club knowing that he would use us as a stepping stone.
And in terms of some of the player, a player who's on loan, but I think I've heard comments around sort of a desire to maybe retain him for longer than that. Broja this season has been an interesting sort of player to watch in terms of when he's appeared to be locked in, aggressive, and I suppose as intense as possible. He's proved to be a real handful. But then there's been other games where it appears he's just drifting around the games. His season seems to have been almost like that, to be honest. Sort of in patches where he's been sort of particularly hot, and then other patches where he seemed to make little impact. I mean, what have you made of him this season? What kind of sort of forward is he at his best? And then, do you think he will likely be sort of staying at the club beyond the season?
I think there was a lot of optimism that he would stay in the January window. I think we just had new owners. Chelsea showed no kind of necessity for a new striker, and then they obviously had all the stuff that happened with Roman Abramovich, and the sanctions that came with that, and that kind of correlated with Broja's dip in form. If I'm correct, he hasn't scored a Premier League goal, I want to say, since our win at Spurs. He hasn't scored a goal full stop since West Ham in the Cup. So that's early March. Overall, I really like him. I'd love him to stay. I think he's a really exciting talent. Physical, holds the ball up well. I think he's got to work on his distribution a bit, working kind of in a partnership, because obviously Ralph Hasenhuttl plays the 2 up front. But given the fact that he came into the club as, the plan was for him to be third choice, with Adam Armstrong being bought for £15 million, and then obviously Shea Adams having a good season last year. He's done excellently. It'd be nice if he could finish. He's on 9 goals right now. It'd be nice if he could finish on double digits. But if you said to me 20 million, 25 million, and Brozier can be asked permanently, I'd snap your hand off for that. I think what the frustration is with him right now is the fact that he just hasn't looked bothered for the last 2 months. I think a lot of fans kind of feel like mentally he's already back at Chelsea. But for me, I don't see how he gets into that Chelsea side. I understand it with Conor Gallagher. I can see that. But for me, I don't see how Armando Brozier gets into Chelsea's team right now, even with whatever sanctions, transfer bans, whatever they're going to have to face over the summer. With the current squad, I really don't see how Brozier gets into that side. So yeah, if the opportunity to sign him permanently came up, I'd absolutely take it, I was saying.
And in terms of sort of, I mean, we spoke about the rebuild. We spoke about sort of maybe that 5-point plan to try and sort of get Southampton on the best foot forward as a club. Yes, there's changes there that we were discussing around the infrastructure, around the coaching staff, around maybe having allowing Hasenhüttl a little bit more influence on the players that come in. But in terms of the players you think he needs to come in order to sort of, I don't know, implement his way of playing most effectively. It's pretty clear sort of how he wants to play. It always has been, unless that's changed fundamentally, do you think, since he's been at the club? But if you were to identify those sort of key positions where you think the club really needs to get those sorted out this summer, and then of course there'll be plenty of outgoings as well. It looks like even if buyers can't be found for a couple of the players who are still at the club, it appears as though the club is going to be willing to sort of let them go anyway. So that sounds like it's going to be quite an overhaul in the summer. So which positions do you think would be the most important?
Well, it's obviously cliche to say for a rebuild. I'd say all positions, but I think primarily for me it's centre back. I think for a good few seasons now we've just been shipping way too many goals. I've not been a fan of Jan Bednarek for a long time, and I think he's very quickly becoming unpopular amongst the fan base. With Salisu, there's plenty of potential. We know how good he's going to be, and yes, one day he will leave for good money. But with Bednarek, given the fact that he's a regular international for Poland, he just keeps repeating the same mistakes. He'll have one good game and then a couple bad ones, and he just won't find that consistency, despite adding goals to his game somehow this year. But then you've got players like Fraser Forster, who looks like he's going to be leaving on a free. Shane Long will be leaving. Jack Stevens, I believe, will be leaving. I think there are a few, who have been at the club for a long time who will be leaving. So Southampton need to kind of find that extra squad depth in alternatives, and I think that's where the summer's going to be busy. But yeah, I'd say centre back for me is the main one. Wingers, we need a bit more creativity from out wide. Stuart Armstrong's aging; he hasn't had a good season at all. Mohamed Elyounoussy's never really been convincing for me. Nathan Redmond, I think, is going to be going. So right now we've got strikers in the sense that Shea Adams is kind of now proven to be able to bag double digits in the Premier League, kind of 10, 11 goals, whatever. And I think he'll only get better from now on. Adam Armstrong has been a major disappointment in his first season at Saints, given the money that we spent for him. But yeah, for me, I think solidifying that defence is absolutely key. We'll have to strengthen every position, of course we will. But given that we've had 3, 4, maybe even 5 seasons now going beyond Hasenhüttl of where we've just been absolutely hopeless at the back, just shipping goals for fun. When we lose, we get battered kind of thing. So that needs to be cut out completely.
And would you say in terms of sort of the types of defenders we need to be recruited, it's those that have, I presume, pacey, good on the ball, comfortable sort of sweeping, comfortable sort of defending 1v1. I'm presuming you're not looking for people who are comfortable just defending in their own box.
Yeah, I think pace is a good trait to have as a modern day centre back. I think he's not particularly blessed with it. I think in terms of holding up his man, I mean, I don't know if he still does, but he was topping the Premier League for interceptions. Puts a foot in. I think standing his ground, he's a fantastic defender in that sense. But for me, it's not even just the physical attributes, it's the mental attributes as well. I think we need someone with experience. I'll be honest with you. I think we need someone, kind of in the last stage of their 20s, or someone who's, for example, captain this side. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know, if we're going to be looking for in the championship once again, I think Joe Worrell would be exceptional, if Forest aren't to get promoted, because he's captained his side for so long. Okay, hasn't got the Premier League experience, but has the leadership qualities. That it's that sort of mold I think we need. We need that kind of extra leadership in the side, because to be honest with you, I think it depends who you ask, but James Ward-Prowse, he's a brilliant footballer. He's Southampton through and through, but I don't think anyone's been 100% convinced that he's captain material.
Interesting. What are the reasons behind that?
I think it's just it just doesn't seem as though he rallies the troops. I think when Southampton are on the verge of a battering, it seems as though his head drops a bit. It does, he'll do the clapping of the hands. You see it on the TV, like clapping the hands, like trying to regroup, and then we go and concede another 3, like we did against Chelsea, for example. Trying to galvanise the squad, be a leader on the pitch. He leads by example in terms of his footballing ability. Of course he does, and there have been plenty of games this season where he's absolutely saved us. I believe without James Ward-Prowse's goal contributions, I couldn't tell you exactly, but we'd be very much in the bottom 3. Whether we'd be already relegated, I'm not too sure. But he's obviously been absolutely crucial with his abilities. But I think he needs that extra help when it comes to leadership, because it does seem that too many of these players are just too quiet. They just don't lead by example. They don't have those natural leadership qualities. We had Jose Font, and I think he's a really good example of what we want from a captain. Kelvin Davis back in the Championship as well. Big figure at the back, booming voice, commanding, leading by example. Obviously adores the club, which Ward-Prowse does. Of course he does. But we've had some brilliant captains in the past, and James Ward-Prowse is a brilliant player. I'm just not convinced, and I think a lot of fans are like this. They're not convinced he's a brilliant captain.
Yeah, even with that sort of more cynical side to his game, as we were talking about there, where he's learned some of the dark arts. I do think it's whenever you've been captain throughout a number of seasons where those seasons have featured heavy defeats, and yet you've obviously you're not able to single-handedly turn the tides of those games, especially if there's sort of systemic issues and things like that. But yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Sort of the ability to sort of wrestle back some control in games like that is, it's always a strong quality that you see from the best captains in the league. And just one point before we sort of talk about sort of the Liverpool game briefly and sort of wrap things up. But in terms of James Ward-Prowse's development this season, you mentioned some of the strong points to his game, but I'm just wondering if you think there's a particular reason why things seem to have clicked so much for him, or do you think he's just coming into the prime of his career, basically?
Sorry, Harry, could you just repeat that for who was that? Sorry.
Oh, just James Ward-Prowse. I'm just talking about sort of
with Ward-Prowse.
Is there a particular reason why you think he's had such a burst of development this season, or do you think these are just the prime years of his career anyway? So he's just finding his best rhythm.
No, I think Hasenhüttl's done a lot of good work with him. I think man to man, he's coached him excellently. I mean, I think I've mentioned it on here before how when Hasenhüttl came in, Ward-Prowse was on the verge of leaving. I think for Watford were interested, a couple of other clubs. I think some Championship clubs were interested in him. Mark Hughes, I don't believe he made the squad for Mark Hughes' final game or one of the last games. He was that far down the pecking order, really. And then Ralph came in, worked with him really well, and Ward-Prowse went on to score, I think, 6 goals that season. And then, of course, he's kept working. He's always had the free kicks and the set piece deliveries. But no, I think it is more the fact that he's kind of in his prime years. I couldn't tell you. Obviously, he's the best man to ask, but he hasn't come out and said that he's gone and changed his diet or changed his training habits, or he's spending an extra 5-10 minutes. In fact, I've heard players say that now he doesn't even practice his free kicks that much. He's that good at it. So I couldn't tell you if there's something, some special, energy drink that he drinks before every game, or he's got a ritual or whatever. He'd have to answer that himself. I think it mainly is the fact that he's just come into, the or the prime years, sorry, of his career. He's got the England experience now. I think he's come out and said, in fairness to him, how much the Euros snub effect hurt him, and how much it motivated him. The fact that he was in the provisional squad and didn't make the final cut, given the fact as well, we can obviously talk about hindsight for hours and days on end, but given the fact that we lost the final on penalties and you've got England's best set piece taker at home, it does kind of make you think, okay, now, if he keeps up what he's doing in the Premier League, he absolutely has to go to these tournaments, with Qatar in 6 months' time, he absolutely has to be on that plane. And I think, the experience of the rejection really kind of helped him.
Yeah, and I think that's it's an obvious factor to use that as motivation. And yeah, I think you're right. I think whenever there's a international tournament of any kind, you do want your best set piece taker to be there. And I think he's surely he has proven that by now. They're sort of amongst the options that exist in the squad, even with some of them who are have wonderful technique. And I think Liverpool fans always at pains to sort of defend Trent and his sort of weird situation around sort of how often he gets included or doesn't get included in the England squad. But yeah, I think that James Ward-Prowse's technique is very much not under question. And so for the final 2 games of the season, it must feel slightly flat in terms of the fact that it appears as though the team are sort of largely already on the beach in terms of how these performances have gone. Obviously, you've got Liverpool on Tuesday, and then the final game of the season is away to Leicester. What are you expecting from those 2 games? I mean, are you expecting more of the same in terms of some of the performance levels you've seen? Do you think that it is a case of just drifting towards the end of the season now and then sort of really focusing all the efforts on the rebuild in the summer? Or are you expecting there to be some sort of response after that Brentford defeat that you mentioned was your most disappointing moment of the season?
I mean, I've been expecting a reaction, a result since early March. I'll be honest with you. No, I don't think there's a sane fan that expects us to pick up a single point from the last 2 games. I mean, Leicester are a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde. Potentially, we could go there and get something. We've done it in the past. They've not had the best season in the Premier League. But in terms of Tuesday night, I think, this team is incredibly unpredictable. There's going to be 2 ways we kind of approach this game. We'll either kind of sit quite deep, impress, maybe go into the halftime goalless, for example, or maybe having a lead similar to that game. I think it was at the end of the 18-19 season, when we took the lead and then lost 3-1. Potentially seeing something like that, or completely out of the blocks for us, similar to the Chelsea game, and we kind of feel sorry for ourselves once again. I don't see us getting anything from the Liverpool game. Leicester, there's a chance we might come away with a point, maybe a surprise win, who knows? But, even though on the whole our home form's been pretty good this year, I can't see anything but a Liverpool win, given the fact that, you're still in the title race. Okay, Jurgen Klopp's come out and said that changes are going to have to be made, especially with the 2 major injuries after the FA Cup final, whether or not Van Dijk and Salah will be fit. Obviously, I don't know. You'll know better than me. But I think everyone's just, I mean, for the last month, I would say everyone's been just waiting for the end of the season, because it's been that much of an eyesore, watching this team kind of capitulate and just look not bothered, and all these different, aspects. It's just, I think now we're just waiting for the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair enough. And then I think just to really wrap things up then, I mean, we spoke about a number of different things that you would sort of want for Southampton going into the summer and sort of help the team kick on next season. If you could pick one thing that out of any of the things that we've discussed so far, that you could guarantee gets done this summer, whether it be hierarchy change, whether it be a specific player come in, or a specific sort of coaching thing around the staff there being sorted out. What would it be? Would it be a centre back? Would it be sort of an ironclad centre back?
I can guarantee you that we will be signing a goalkeeper given the fact that Fraser Forster's leaving,
Ah,
whether
yeah.
that's first choice or not. Alex McCarthy's just signed a new contract, which is baffling in its own sense. But right now, it seems like I can't even pronounce his first name. Barta Dragowski of Fiorentina and Gavin Bazuna, who has actually just spent this season on loan at Portsmouth, which is quite funny. They're the two that have been named at the moment in terms of goalkeepers. But for me, I think besides the guarantee of signing a new goalkeeper, I think if we finish the transfer window having not beaten our club record fee, I think a lot of supporters are going to be really disappointed because it stands at £20 million from when we signed Danny Ings permanently from you guys. And I think now, I mean, we've talked about the net spend. If we're not spending more than 20, if our club record fee is £20 million following the summer of 2022, given the fact that all these teams have come up, I mean, you know, for example, we talked about Sheffield United. They spent at least 30 on Sander Berge. Okay, yeah, he's playing in the Championship now, but it's just showing that ambition to, you know, splash the cash a little bit. Of course, you know, some of our big signings and big money signings, that is, haven't worked out. The likes of Sofiane Boufal, Mario Lemina, Guido Carrillo. But then our most expensive ever transfer was one of the best strikers we've had, or probably the best striker we've had in the Premier League since we got promoted, arguably. So we've got to spend some money. We've got to show ambition. That's what's going to keep us keep our heads above the water. Because for me, that is the main concern. You've got Newcastle, who obviously are going to have incredible funds available. You know, given where they were as recently as kind of October, November. You know, Brighton have just got to have a good season. Of course, who knows what's going to happen with Graham Potter if he kind of goes, but I'm sure they're going to be looking to kick on. Crystal Palace, they've got an exciting project with Patrick Vieira and some really exciting young players in there. I'm sure Fulham will be spending money. They've done it before. I guarantee you Fulham will spend money with them back in the Premier League. And whoever wins the playoffs, you know, we've seen it as well. So Southampton need to keep their head above water. They need to go and spend some money. They need to, you know, cut out these mistakes, cut out this deadwood, and completely kind of rebuild this squad under new ownership, because the fear is, you know, they're going to get left behind. I mean, you've seen it for 2 seasons now. It looks like we're going to finish 15th. You know, given that we were 10th a couple of months ago, we finished 15th last year because of a massive slip up. If we keep slipping up for seasons to come, we will be relegated within the next couple of years, and that's where Southampton need to really, you know, choose wisely this summer. You know, they need to get their supporters back on side, because they've lost a lot of from the fan base, I would say. You know, there's a big split on the manager right now, so they need this transfer window to go excellently. There are loads of changes that need to be made, but of course the main thing is going to be the squad. So they need to spend some money. They need to improve every area of the pitch. And, you know, like I say, keep their head above water, really.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense in terms of injecting some new energy into the club, both in terms of sort of getting the fan base on side, as you mentioned. There are a bunch of exciting projects from other teams with some sort of new faces in the dugouts, or new young players. Crystal Palace, I think, have been a really good example of that this season as well. So I think you're right. Yeah, biting the bullet and actually sort of spending some money to show ambition and actually try and make Southampton a much more competitive force as they used to be, especially with those teams, as you mentioned, who are almost guaranteed to be spending and guaranteed to be approaching things that way. So, as always, Dan, yeah, thanks so much for coming on and sort of giving us
my pleasure.
Your insight into Southampton. It always feels a little bit drab when sort of seasons do end up drifting to a close like this, and it does feel that's been the case over the past sort of 10 or 11 games for Southampton. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on and sort of giving us your insight on what you think needs to be done.
No, my pleasure. No, thank you for having me. And we'll see what happens with the title race. I'm very interested.
Yes, yeah, we'll see what happens with that, of course. And for all those listeners who've been tuning in week in, week out to listen to me here on sort of Rival Recon, as we've been doing before each and every Premier League game. We've tried to keep the flame alight. There's a game going on right now, listeners, that I'll let you know that I'm refusing to look at the score. So you could be listening to me thinking I'm a complete idiot because I don't know what's happening, and actually the title race is wildly alive, or the title race is perhaps not as alive as we hoped. But coming into the last game, I think it's still, hopefully there is something for us to play for. Obviously that last game of the season against Wolves on the 22nd, so there'll be an episode ahead of that. But other than that, thank you very much for listening to Rival Recon throughout this season, and yeah, hopefully we'll have something still something to be fighting for ahead of that last episode on the 22nd.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.